see you.
Hello, you too.
All right, well, we'll just jump right in because I know everybody's anxious to hear from you. And so we'll get through the introductions and then dive right into the conversation. As Norma said, I'm Lesa Nikolai. I work on the client partnership team at Ampersand. And really, we're a media technology company. Our mission is bringing brands to audiences through content, through distribution, across screens and devices, providing insights and measurements to help advertisers like yourself understand their total TV investments. And my role in particular is working directly with brands. Our goal, I think you and I talked a little bit about it, is to really try to simplify and unify the ability of advertisers to plan and measure and buy across this crazy marketplace that we now call TV, which pretty much includes everything, and figure a way around that to get precision audiences at scale. And so Ampersand has been around for a while. We rebranded a year ago, so our name may be a little bit newer, but we've been around for a minute. So maybe not as long as Heineken though. So that's a little about me. So do us a favor, Quinn, and give us an idea of your role and what you're doing over there at Heineken.
Sure. Yeah. So I run a pretty new team over at Heineken where we cover a lot of ground, most of it non-traditional. So it's on the traditional side, all of our big to small sponsorships across the board, like the Major League Soccer, college football playoffs, all the various NBA, NHL, MLB teams, Coachella, US Open. So all of those kind of bigger sponsorships, we run those. On the more non-traditional side is more integrated media opportunities, so non-traditional media opportunities. So that would be product integration into TV shows and movies whatever the next thing around the corner is a good way of looking at it. So yeah, I don't do the traditional GRPs, but all the LED branding and boarding you would get within the sports sponsorship side to the product integration bit, which we're going deeper and deeper into as a company.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, when we spoke earlier in the week, we touched base, which I don't know about you, but it feels like 2 weeks ago, and it was just a couple of days.
It's 2 days or 2 years. It's really
I
hard
know,
to tell
isn't it the truth?
Yeah, just one long day.
It was interesting because you've been there for a little bit, so you had time to have a year or so before the COVID. But I think we have to start there, right, with the impact of COVID on your business in 2020, especially since so much of your approach is non-traditional. That kind of hit a dead stop. So, talk to us a little bit about those early days and what you guys did to adapt and to make up for those changes and losses. And then we'll talk about, are you going to keep some of those changes? Did some of those things work so well that you'll keep them even as we move into 2021?
Yeah. So it wasn't boring, that's for sure. Yeah, so there's a lot of, I work really closely with my counterpart on the more traditional media side. So the two of us, he actually, candidly, his job was much more difficult in that regard. Having to move around all of a full media plan is quite complex with probably 10 different replans during 2020. So super complex. On our end, a lot of that ends up being more conversations with the partners, right? So if there's no Major League Soccer season, at least initially there was not, that's very complex. We're a partner of the league and we're a partner with 14 of the teams individually. So that's 15 contracts and that's 15 deliverables that you're not going to be seeing. So it's, you work closely with your partners in order to figure out how you can make goods, and candidly, it's not in our best interest for them to go broke, right? So we need to figure out a way to work with them to keep the ship floating until collectively we can figure out a way forward. So, we did that across, over 90 different partnerships across the country. And as our partners, the college football playoffs of the world, the various teams and leagues figured out what they wanted to do, we were there to support them. And just because there aren't fans in the stadium, people are still watching the games at home. So, how can we get more branding during the viewing experience? That's one way you can certainly get make up some impressions for sure. in that regard. In other cases, events get canceled, and you just have to pivot, and we push that off to the following year, or it just goes away. So like, there was a lot of learning in that regard. I do think, we're gonna end up taking what we learned and implementing some of it going forward as well too. So we found that it's possible that we had too much of our investment with one or two big partners, which makes a lot of sense in 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and way more sense 10 years ago. But it's such a fragmented market now, and TV means, as you said in the beginning, 40 different things depending on who you talk to, that we need to have our hands in more places, and it makes for a more complex plan. But you kind of have to do it. You have to go where the viewers are. You have to go where the consumers are. You have to follow them. They're not likely to follow you. It's not really how it works.
Right.
So, we did change our behavior. We are going to probably play with more partners versus fewer. So we have more backups, and those who are more flexible, well, we're going to be more likely to work with them. And that's not going away. I think, viewing habits have changed for good, or at least they've been expedited. This has been a long journey, but people, you tend to view where you are, right? And if you stop if you stop being on network TV, on cable TV, and start being more in Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus, well, that's now the environment you're in. So instead of switching channels, you're just switching shows. So we have to evolve to that too. And that's part of where the product integration side comes in, where it's going to be harder to get our commercials out there, where a place where people are going to see them, but we still need our product out there, and we still need to tell our brand story. So if anything, it just escalated that timeline where we're going to be looking more and more to integrate ourselves into non-traditional, media opportunities. Certainly not walking away from the tried and true. It's still the best ROI you can get is a straight up TV buy on network television, but it's not as much of a slam dunk as it used to be. So we've got to be open to new things.
Yeah, it's definitely not a standalone anymore, right? There's just too much diversity, too many changes. So as you see those changes and you're saying diversify, work with more partners, look at integrations instead of your traditional, for lack of a better word, or legacy, let's say, partners, has that changed also the way that you have to define your consumer, or did you change it for you? As I mean, like, now you're in a socially distanced virtual world where, to your point, all of your kind of awareness and input was in that direct on-site place. How have you pivoted that? Have you changed consumer behavior? Have you changed how you're defining that? I mean, what's your consumer look like today?
Yeah, I mean, it has changed, but that's been evolving without COVID. So COVID didn't necessarily change who we're trying to speak to. It did change how we speak to them. I think every category that I can think of, and certainly in the beverage side, whether it be alcoholic or non-alcoholic, there's just so many more options that people are consuming, buying, trying so many more brands than they used to. And that's, again, that genie is not going back in the bottle, right? That's going to keep happening. So you have to reach more people. It was possible in the past to be more targeted and like, all right, we're going after these 20 million people and that's all we're going to need. Can't do that anymore. You have to go after just about anybody who will drink beer and try to convert them. Now, of course, your funnel will tighten where it makes sense, but you do have to go after a broader demographic. When we don't have the ability to have in-person conversation with our consumers, our people who drink us, then you got to figure out more of a virtual way to do it. So, we had over 30 million people that we were planning on talking to in person in 2020. That number probably fell to, a couple million. That includes anything from sampling to Coachella, where we have 100,000 people who go through the Heineken house on 2 weekends. Those are gone. So you still need to talk to those people. You still need to remind them about your products and your brands and get the love for them. So we tried doing a lot of virtual options that were kind of virtual experiences, they're not great. It's not a great way to do experiences. We had a couple wins. Our Tecate brand had a very successful way. They launched a program called El Patio, which is sort of a Mexican American themed concert that worked well virtually, actually. But other than that, we had really struggled there. So we actually got a lot more viewers out of that than we would have. So that was a good learning. We're going to keep doing that. We leaned more into e-commerce. E-commerce on the beverage side, particularly the beer side, was more or less non-existent a year ago today. Today, it's tripled, quadrupled, probably even 10x, honestly. That's the pace we're at. So it's still small when you were starting with such a small base, but it's going to keep going up for a while. Like, it's not, I don't think it'll be the dominant sector, but it's going to be a meaningful sector in our industry now. And actually, that's a good thing. You can now have a direct conversation online, which we really struggled with in the past because there was no reason to. We had nothing to offer. But now when you can say, come buy my product, that's going to change things. So yeah, I mean, I think the most lasting impact on where we speak to people is probably on the e-commerce side, because the direct relationship just didn't exist before for a variety of reasons in the beer category.
Yeah, a lot of obstacles to overcome on that front that made a lot of headway quickly. One of the things that COVID accelerated absolutely for that was opening up that e-commerce window for a lot of brands, not just yours, but you in particular in your world had more obstacles to overcome, right? You have different regions, different rules.
Yeah, I mean, we've got over 200 distributors that we need to sell through. We can't sell directly to consumers given the 3-tier system that's been in place in the U.S. since Prohibition ended. So yeah, you've got over 200 distributors. Every one of them wants to make sure that they represent us in a given market, and then rightly so, they want to make sure that they're the ones delivering that beer, which is very complex in a e-commerce world. So, and this sped it along. Like, you don't really have an option at this point. So, and I think, Uber making the acquisition of Drizzly made a huge difference too. That's gonna keep this progress going. That was a good partnership for the beer space.
Yeah. So it sounds like, if he's thinking about this from a bigger point of view, if you start changing your media model or your media mix, for lack of a better word, shifting some of that on-site to adding more vendors, but actually moving some of that maybe into that D2C world just a little bit. Yep. As you look at that at Heineken, do you typically approach that by each brand? Does each brand have sort of a different approach to those sources? Obviously, Tecate, like you said, you had a good experience there. Are there certain venues or programs that work better than others?
It tends to be more regional than activity, I guess I would say. So each of our brands has more of a strength on a regional basis than another one. So a lot of our activity is pretty similar. And so I think we try to experiment with each brand and share those learnings. So yeah, what Tecate managed to pull off in sort of a virtual music space and getting millions of viewers there was meaningful. That we'll try to use that with other brands. I would say, and likewise in the e-commerce side, we lean more into Dos Equis at first, and we've also leaned more into the Heineken 0.0 side because that's a non-alcoholic beer that's growing like crazy. In certain states, we have more flexibility because it is truly zero alcohol. It's less alcohol than apple juice, right? So you can actually, it opens some doors in certain states. So we try to learn across brands. The one bit that I think for sure that we are now leveraging everywhere is, again, that e-commerce one-to-one relationship. A data-driven relationship. We're implementing more CRM because of that. Mm-hmm. Again, where in the past it wasn't necessarily worthwhile. Because there was no way to kind of close the deal on a one-to-one basis. But now that there is, we'll be doing more one-to-one, particularly on a local level. So we'll do our mass communication on the network TV side, or I'll just use the term programmatic TV where that's available. It's not a huge inventory, but it does work for us. And then the funnel, when you go down the funnel to like that, direct response, direct purchase. That's done more in our high share markets for the most part, and that's where we're starting. But yeah, we've shifted a lot of money there that wouldn't have been in that space before, right? So that might come out of another bucket of digital advertising, or it might come out of TV. So it's not an unlimited bucket. So it does require shuffling things around in order to leverage those learnings, essentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we talked about that, the customer journey and that funnel, even especially from your perspective and what you're trying to balance between regional and all of the other pieces that are going together for you. That's almost more like a wheel with the spokes more than a funnel. You have a lot of pieces coming together to make one picture.
The easiest way to kind of sum that up is probably like if you take a brand like Dos Equis that is massive in Texas but non-existent essentially in New York. They both have, Dos Equis has huge awareness because of the Most Interesting Man campaign in both states, but we're not really available in New York. So we've tried e-commerce in New York with Dos Equis. Can't possibly pass because you can't find it. Like if you can't find the beer, then you don't do e-commerce. While in Texas, it's a massive beer. We sell 50 million Dos Equis or so a year in Texas. Everywhere you go, you find it. So we have a huge ROI and return on investment in Texas for Dos Equis. So you have to be much more regional in that approach. You want to get the aggregate amount of views but you do have to kind of, to your point, it's very fragmented in that regard.
Yeah, you got to cut across regions and geographies as well. Mm-hmm. So as you look at, keeping if we're going to use the funnel, the top of the funnel with your brand awareness, your big network buys and so forth, and you start to drill down more specifically by market and by region, that also varies a lot then by sports. I would think like what sports and what region, whether you're doing national sports or local sports, that type of thing. Do you see expanding that in 2021? I know you were super limited in 2020 because of COVID, obviously, but as we see things rolling back, March Madness, those things starting to come back, how are you guys thinking about playing in that space moving forward?
For sure. So yeah, we, if anything, we actually leaned in more to it in 2020 on the viewership side, right from home. The ratings weren't ideal, mostly a couple of reasons, I think. One, for sure, is we just were stacking, each league was stacked on top of each other instead of being spread out through the year. There's only same households watch a lot of the same sports. So it was hard to do that. But, sports viewership was solid overall. It was down, but we think that's part of it. For sure. I mean, it's still one of the few things that you don't want to DVR or you don't want, you need to watch TV to watch your sports. So live sports is 100% a space where we will continue to double down on. We try to have that national umbrella where, currently that's on the Dos Equis side, college football playoffs is our national play. And then we have 10 team deals in our higher share markets where like University of Alabama or Florida, Texas A&M, UCLA, USC, where we go in deeper. And then you can go the whole way down the funnel that way. So they're watching, consumers are watching the games at home and watching our commercials at home. They go to the game and our viewers are in the game. Or they get a digital offer, with a Dos Equis Texas A&M combined offer. And that is, we can trigger that based off of the data and the first and second party data we know about that person. So, 80% of the country on the Dos Equis side will only see one national message. But in the higher share markets, you're going to get, multiple, the whole journey on the way down the funnel. And so we're going to keep doing that. Sports is a good way for us to connect. And locally, it connects better than nationally. But we need national for the impressions and the efficiency, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's exciting. We're looking forward actually to seeing those because we're all itching to watch some more sports. To your point, we, from our point of view, from the Ampersand side, we tracked viewing very, very specifically, especially in the beginning, to watch some trends. And the viewing trends were were Super Bowl numbers for days and weeks just of people craving information and wanting to see more. Obviously, you're starting to see that level out and become back to some of the norms, but sports being, kind of all squished together at the same time and trying to make up for things, I think accounts for some of the split viewership, and you can't see everything, and you're depending on where you're located. So
yeah, and everything we've seen so far in conversations with the various sports leagues, there'll be much less overlap this year. I mean, they're mostly going to be starting on time and mostly have a regular schedule and mostly are going to be fans there. So I do expect that to normalize, and we're just going to kind of hope that old habits return and people aren't sucked into Netflix forever. But we're optimistic.
Well, and to that point, as we do start to filter out there, how are you thinking about? You spoke a little bit about integrations, but talk a little bit more about the value of that and how your Heineken's approaching that as things are more crowded in the TV space, or as you're looking to let's say to build off what your national play is doing beyond your brand, to do other things about awareness. Talk a little bit about some of the successes you've had with integration or some of the challenges. I know measurement of that or the ROI of that has been a challenge in the industry. So how are you guys accounting for that?
Yeah, I mean, that is, so my personal belief, and that's part of why we started this team at Heineken, is that I think that is some version of significantly more integration is the future. Like companies are never going to stop paying people to run our ads, whether those ads are integrations or those ads are commercials. Like as long as there's an ROI, we're going to keep doing it. So, but if people's viewing habits change and they continue to run away from commercials, which I can't imagine that they're going to want them again. So you have to find ways to get your message across. And candidly, an integration for me is better because it's more organic and authentic if you do it the right way. A couple examples. We don't do as many on the network TV side just because that's not necessarily the model currently, but we have had a couple successes, again, more in the live, I'll call it live. Sports for sure, like that's the old model, right? You get the LED boards around the side, you have brought to you by messages, like that's very common. The part that's a little bit new is so two parts. One is the backflow was one example. So
Oh yeah.
it's good when you have the integration within the show itself, but also they're very flexible on having the contestants like outside of the show itself and on the digital front. So like all over social media, we have our own little sub campaign that runs with the contestants. And that it's really hard to get a true measure of what that is because you measure the TV, you measure the social, you measure them differently, and we don't have an ROI. Our marketing media mix model doesn't capture that today, and we haven't found anyone that kind of measures a pure integration like that. So you've got to make some guesstimates. Another example is on like the Late Show. We did one with James Corden where we were actually integrated into the show. We had a Heineken bar. So you have much more. We'd do like little skits with him. Feels really good. People are watching it. I can't tell you if it's more effective than a 30-second commercial. We think it is, and we've now switched that from James Corden to Seth Meyers, but same idea. So that's more where it is on the TV side. With the stars and the Netflix and both the paid cable and streaming side, there's much more traditional integration like you would see in movies. So we have a whole team working on that where we are, doing our best up front to getting integrated into the biggest shows out there. And we do that on there are many Netflix shows, there are many stars in particular, actually one that's good at that, Showtime's good at that. HBO doesn't do it. But you can get deep integrations in that regard, the same way we do in movies. So like Bad Boys 3 was the biggest movie, I think, of 2020. In the beginning there, we had a 5-minute integration throughout the movie. And we're trying to get that into TV shows. So we want that model brought in. It's a complex model because you don't buy that media. You make a deal with the producers who are looking for production dollars. So, and then there's literally no way to measure it. So, we have a marketing media mix model we do every year. And every year we have this big hole on our integrations because we just don't know how to measure it. So we end up doing back of the envelope math. That's like, all right, we know 30 million people saw this. That's a good number. And we know we were on screen for, 75 seconds. And so you kind of have to do your own back of the envelope. But I actually genuinely believe that's the future because it's not interrupting your experience. It's a part of the storyline. You can pick how you want your brand to be viewed, and it's somebody's getting paid, right? So as long as somebody's getting paid, we should all be happy. Nobody's asking for handouts here. So that model is changing, and it will continue to change. That's where I see a lot of the future, either that side or the very targeted one-to-one communication, which turns into like an e-commerce purchase. Like that's the way I
Yeah,
would
and
see
really
it.
that precision that we were talking about, that precision at scale, combining those two things, right, with the integrations with that,
Yeah.
hitting that audience as they go into the theater or whatever. And I think it's a very interesting thought about the Netflix and those other streaming companies. As the other part of COVID for 2020, your Bachelor example is great because they can add legs to that. You can get even more, off of a one-shot integration. But they didn't do that many movies, and they certainly didn't do movie releases, right? And even how all of that changed so rapidly. So that kind of avenue of being integrated in movie beyond Bad Boys, maybe, they're like the block, like, we're going to do our signs. Okay, now there's no games. Okay, we're going to do this. Okay, now there's no,
Yeah, exactly.
that like, wow, that's a lot of balls to keep in the air. And as an industry to start solving for, how do we measure that? How do we start to provide some ROI to really put meaning behind that?
I would bet a fair amount of money that if there was a meaningful way to measure those types of integrations, that it would explode.
Absolutely.
Because right now it doesn't happen because there's no market. Like you need measurement to have a market. And we would absolutely put way more of our money into that if we can measure it, but we can't. So you go with where the traditional tried and true are.
Sure.
But it's got to be measurable. It just hasn't been so far. So someone will figure that out, and it'll change things for the better for everybody because it's not interrupting, and that's important. And allows you can get the streaming experience without necessarily having to stream. So
I also think that you're right. I think that what will be interesting is when we figure it out, right? Because as an industry, as we start to unify all of these things, we have to, at some point, find some way to measure it and to figure it out. But then I wonder if you're going to start seeing a lot more brands inside the show,
which is definitely a watch out,
somebody
right?
with a product in every hand in every shot. Yeah. So that might be a challenge for the producer.
That's a good point. So right, like Netflix right now, when it's a Netflix-owned show, they're not allowing any integrations, and that's probably why. When they're buying a show that's been produced, then you can get it in there. But so I think you're right. They're trying to put a wall up. Now that'll happen. That'll stop as soon as the growth in subscriber base stops. But you're right. Like that, it could get out of control, right? If you had 35 brands littered through something, that's no fun.
Yeah, and to some of the integrations are more subtle than others. Yours is a fun brand and an easy brand to integrate, so it's not like you have to randomly work in some product. It kind of lends itself to that environment. So as you talk about these, some of the things you've done that are successful, as you look at innovations, as you try new things, how are you defining a successful, I don't even know, are you calling it a campaign? Like, how are you thinking about, do you look at it as a campaign? Are you looking at it by a quarter? Like, how in your non-traditional sort of world do you measure success?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance of the traditional and non-traditional. So, at this point, sports sponsorship is traditional, right? So it's actually pretty, we track that, you negotiate that up front, how many minutes of, brand sponsorship on the screen you get, try to find an easy, like a simple way of stating those words, but essentially how often do you see Heineken during a soccer game, right? That's pretty easy to track. It was more complex in 2020 because we had less games. So it meant more minutes per game and there was no fans. So actually you could put more branding up if you wanted to in the seats. So that one is, during the season, and we are in pretty much every sport, at least on the local level, we just track that. Are you track along? Are you getting what you paid for? Our terrific media buying partner, Canvas, helps us track that. That one's, and then candidly, because there's not as many integration opportunities, it ends up being more one-off, right? So on the TV side, we probably only have a handful of those we can do per year because there aren't as many opportunities that, you kind of stop what you're doing and track it while it happens in real time. And then there's a parallel path of ongoing conversations to try to get the next level, the next wave of those.
Sure.
But it would be a heck of a lot easier if it was more automated, like if it was more of a process that, we have that work stream within Canvas, within our media buying firm, right? We have a digital plan. We still have a radio plan. We have a TV plan. Like we have the whole plan. It's pretty easy to put that in motion. While this is more of a manual labor of love at this point that we think has high impact, but we can't prove it.
Yeah, so we're back to the wheel and the spokes.
Yeah, exactly.
my new funnel.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pieces to that funnel. But I would say, so do you find, and I know a lot of advertisers, some of the guys today and some just in the past, we're hearing how much not that flexibility wasn't important before, but it's become even more important. So how is that figuring into how you think about planning? Are you doing like shorter windows? And I know your agency works hand in hand with you on those recos and so forth and partnerships, but just as thinking forward through 2021, whereas you might have planned your whole year other than planning your whole sports events, are you looking at it in shorter windows or how are you guys planning?
We kind of had to. I mean, the goal and the hope is that we won't have any more catastrophic global issues to deal with this year, and that they're going more away than coming towards us. And we're a global company too, so as bad as things have been in the U.S., they're not as bad as they've been everywhere as far as business as usual, at least on the beer side, to be fair. But we have to now because if something goes wrong again, we have to be able to turn that spigot off. Which was very hard to do in 2020. We had a lot of shifting back and forth. So we are trying to, the upfront wasn't the upfront this year, right? It wasn't the same way that the upfront usually looks for us. That's probably true for a lot of companies. So yeah, we're trying to be more flexible. We're trying to have shorter contracts even on the media side. Like we've had some long-term media deals with some of the big four in the past. We have to shorten that a little bit now, probably, just because the landscape is changing so quickly, and relationships become more important than ever. Because the reality is, you can have it contracted as much as you want, but it's way better if you can just have a conversation and figure it out together. So, yes, we're trying to have more flexibility built into the model, but honestly, it's even more important now to have a good relationship with your partners, which is where feel pretty good about that actually, because we had a fairly smooth ride, given how bumpy 2020 was. There's not a lot of animosity between ourselves and our partners, and that makes me feel good.
Yeah, that speaks well on both behalves, right? On the behalf of Heineken and on behalf of your partners. So yeah, it's
a long-term game, so you gotta play nice with each other. And I think we've come out okay with it in the end. And normalcy should be closer to a reality in a couple months here. So we'll see what the new world looks like.
I'm holding you to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to guarantee it.
Yeah, I'm going to hold you to that. So as we're going to wrap up, I'm going to have some questions, but before we look at the questions real quick, you had some really, when you and I spoke and we talked about the obstacles and the thoughts about the next coming years and what do you see as opportunities? Give me just a quick, your take on how these obstacles have changed to opportunities, these major shifts in the marketplace. You talked a little bit with me about experimentation. I'd love for you to share that with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is you have to look at an obstacle as an opportunity, and we have. And I think that, I think the way we're planning, particularly on the sports side, we've flipped the way that we're looking at it to be less, we need to have more relationships with more partners in order to to reach as many people as we want to reach, but also you just don't know what's going to happen anymore.
Yeah, you have more things,
more opportunities. But it's not just COVID related. It's too the media habits are changing so fast that if you don't put more fingers and more pots out there and taste the goods, you're just not going to know what's going to work for you. And it's very tempting, particularly when you have a standard, media mix model that we use every year. It's very easy to take the results from that media mix model and just go with the highest performing bid every time. But you'd never learn. And so you just keep doing TV, network TV, and not realizing that you're missing out on a lot of really high impact digital opportunities, e-commerce opportunities. And candidly, in some cases in the beer space, local radio isn't hugely successful, but to still do, which you just assume isn't. But like you have to look everywhere, and digital radio works. And we found that programmatic TV, we did more of that this year because it was easier to flip around. That's really good, actually. It's working well for us. The inventory is just not huge. So it's a matter of, I think the learning that we're taking is that very little of what happened in 2020 can't be leveraged to make 21 and 22 better for us. Like,
well said.
Absolutely. It was painful during the happen, but right now, actually, we feel better prepared for the future, which is good.
Which is a good thing. Well said. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here. I don't know if we're all going to have time. She's going to pop up any second, but I will quickly, let's see. Oh, so earlier in our conversation, you referred to the best ROI, which I think you were talking about sports. Yep. They just asked if you could expand on that, but I believe we were talking about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like the very short answer is every single penny we spend money on is a commercial. It's not just a media mix model; it's a commercial model. Like whether dollars off a six pack or sports on TV, like all of it goes through the same filters, and it's kind of an egalitarian way of finding out